Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So today we're talking about ISTJ careers, the career path for you as an ISTJ. And this really came about, this idea of tuning into careers really came up for us, Antonia, because at the time of this recording, we're in the middle of hosting our Personality Life Path program. We're taking a group of people, it's a mentorship, over 8 weeks, ending with a live event. We're walking everybody through each week one of the energies of the cognitive functions, the Jungian cognitive functions, giving exercising, having people tune into that. So it's really great because it's about finding your life path. Now that you know who you are, how you're wired, where are you going with this? Where are you going to go? What is your destiny in this life based on who you are and how you're wired? A lot of people coming to this program, though, are in the middle of transition. Some are in relationship transition. Some are in like a transition of life, like their kids just left the house or something like that. I would say, though, a majority of people are in a career recalibration or transition. So they're either in a career and they're like, I want to do something different. I'd like to figure out what's next, or I can't do this anymore. I've got to change trajectory. So a lot of this career questioning has been coming up around, okay, I know how I'm wired. What career should I be on? What path, what vocation should I go toward? And so we're talking to a lot of people in transition, and we're assuming you, if you're listening right now as an ISTJ, you're probably also thinking about career. You're thinking about what comes next. Am I on the right track in my life? And so we want to talk about that today.
Well, and on top of that, there is a lot of influence our careers have on us. So even if a person is listening with ISTJ preferences and they're perfectly fine with their career and they've been doing it for 2 decades and they don't have any interest in leaving, it might be interesting to find out how your career has impacted and affected the way that your type shows up.
Yeah.
Because not only does our type influence the career we choose influences how our type manifests. And we spend 40 hours plus a week at this place, right? Doing problem solving, pouring everything we have into it if we're still passionate about it, or at least we have to be diligent.
Yeah.
And that attunes us to certain activities and ways of thinking. And so a part of this podcast isn't just what career should you choose, or if you're in a transition, or, just being, curious about a path, but it can also sate the curiosity about, well, has my career itself altered how I'm showing up as a person?
Yeah. So it's not just prescriptive. It can be descriptive of your journey as an ISTJ.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about what the internet says about ISTJ careers.
Okay.
Does that sound good? I prepared. I brought the ISTJ listening is going to be really proud of me that I have a list that I prepared for, and I've got information to share.
Everybody loves a good list.
So I went out to the internet and I did just some general research. I basically asked Google and the internets, plural, what are the careers that are often talked about, the stereotypical careers for ISTJs? So I have a top 10 list here of what the internet sent back to me. Now, you as an ISTJ may or may not resonate with this, but let's just see. And some of these are, some of our stereotypes or things you'd imagine based on what we know about personality type. Okay. Number 1, accountant. Is that a surprise to you, Antonia? Probably not. That this is what the internet says. I'm not saying this. The internet says this.
Okay.
This is anecdotal. 2, financial analyst, financial analyst, lawyer, engineer, IT manager, human resources manager, project manager, law enforcement officer, military officer, or operations manager. Again, that's just a general list. And if you were to search, you'd probably find career advice for you as an ISTJ. You should probably pursue one of these types of careers or jobs.
Yeah. These lists aren't bad. We've been doing quite a few of these podcasts featuring different types, and that's not a bad list. I would say, though, that it is most likely going to resonate with a fairly stereotypical view of an ISTJ, or an ISTJ that, really resonates with the usual descriptions and profiles. We're going to come at this subject a little differently, though.
Yeah.
Our friend, Dr. Dario Nardi, has recently, over the last year or so, started to talk about this idea of what he is now calling subtypes, even though he was reluctant to call them subtypes. He wanted to originally call them flavors. And the reason why he wanted to call them flavors, or these different variations of each of the types, is because this is more of the nurture component to how type manifests.
Yeah.
So our personality type, in this case ISTJ, that seems to be pre-wired into a person. What our type preferences are, that's more nature, it appears. The best information we have at this point is that we come pre-wired with that. But there is a nurture component. And the nurture component means that over a lifetime, we can alter and shift our subtype or our flavoring of our type, depending upon the circumstances we find ourselves in and the training that we do and the career we choose.
Yeah.
And so we want to talk about ISTJ careers, not just in the more stereotypical version, but also with the different variations of ISTJs, and what a person who has ISTJ preferences but might not look like the cookie cutter version or the stereotype, what kind of careers they might be interested in.
Yeah, and one of the resources I'd direct you to, if you're an ISTJ, we recorded an interview. We have multiple recordings on ISTJs. I got one on giving you ISTJ advice from many years ago, an audio podcast. And we also have an audio podcast interview with Antonia, who has ISTJ preferences. Mm-hmm. She's an interior designer and photographer. And I would say that she is a very unique styled ISTJ that falls outside of the stereotypes you read about online. And we're going to talk about maybe why that is as we go through these expressions. So two things I'd encourage you to think in terms of. We're going to talk about this in a principled way. So we're not going to give you like, you should go do this job as an ISTJ or this career. We're going to give you some principles to think about because there's all sorts of flavorings of ISTJs. And when I say flavorings, what I mean is almost imagine ISTJ is a song written out in paper, like the musical notes of a song. And these 4 expressions we're going to talk about are the performances of that song. So we're still talking about you're an ISTJ. That's how you're wired. That's how you make decisions, learn information. All those things still hold true. But how do you express that? What are the things that you're interested in, the values, the interests you have, all of that?
Right. So we'll give descriptions of each of these subtypes and talk about the careers that they find themselves attracted to or what they really excel at.
Yeah.
And if you are new to type, if you've just discovered you have ISTJ preferences and this is sort of new information for you, I think you'll be able to self-assess which of these subtypes you fall into just through the descriptions. But if you are a type geek, we'll also go into the more the deeper layer of it.
Yeah.
If you want to watch or listen to a full podcast on the concept of subtypes, we recorded it with our friend Dario not that long ago. So please feel free. We'll post a link. You can go listen to or watch that episode talking about how the concept of subtypes work. And it's based on work from Dr. Helen Fisher around neurotransmitters and a little bit borrowed from Socionics Victor Galenko, mostly the names of the subtypes, and a couple other resources. And it emerged by Dario looking at the results of EEG, machine testing, and discovering that a person of the same type can have multiple different ways or basically brain patterns that they favor depending upon things like their career choice.
So this is through observation. Dario had people come into his laboratory, go ahead and confirm ISTJ preferences, and then he would look at the brain patterns, the 4 different brain patterns that would show up, and he organized it based on an ISTJ or a sample size of ISTJs falling into one of these 4 brain patterns.
Right, exactly.
So let's talk right about it. Let's jump in there.
Okay. So the 4 different subtypes are dominant, creative, normalizing, and harmonizing. And for those of you who are into type, you're a type geek, basically the difference is your first 2 cognitive functions. In this case, for an ISTJ, it'd be introverted sensing, what we call memory, and extroverted thinking, or what we've nicknamed effectiveness. Whether or not these functions prefer a more assertive position, like they are more what Dario calls analytic. So they are more focused, they're more single-minded, they're more driven, and they have an energy that sort of goes out, right? It's not extroversion so much as it is more just a certainty, like a sense of taking what's inside and pushing out to the world, right? It's a more driven position.
And just to make sure you're understanding as we go through this, just in case you're new, we're not talking about the person being assertive. We're talking about the part of their cognition that's more focused.
Right. Although that oftentimes shows up as more assertiveness in the individual as well.
Certainly.
And the other way that these functions can show up is what Dario calls holistic, which is a more receptive position. It's not as focused, it's not as targeted, but it's more open. And so instead of focusing on a single point, it more takes in peripheral information, and it tends to have higher degrees of openness, but less focus, less direction. And depending upon the combination of each of these functions, preference for a more analytic, focused, or holistic peripheral experience, then that alters how the type shows up. So the first subtype we'll talk about is the dominant subtype. And the dominant subtype is a more confident and driven version of an ISTJ. It tends to be attracted to managerial and leadership positions, and it's a moving the self and others toward goals, large and small. And so a big part of how an ISTJ with dominant subtype preferences shows up is they're using a bit of charisma, but a lot of managerial capacity to move people towards goals, both large and small. So there's an in-charge style that they take in Linda Barron's interactive style vernacular. So there's a lot of focusing in on listening and speaking, a lot of language-based reasoning. There's a high degree of impulse control that these ISTJs possess. They're adept at mental planning, logic. They are good at conceptual thinking, and they have a strong managerial style, right? Or at least they have natural talent towards managing. They weigh their values and what they know as hard lines against the demands of what is happening here and now. And that is how they problem solve. They go, okay, well, how should it be set up? But what is actually happening? And how do I meet those two things? And they have a tendency to use a little bit of emotional inspiration. They pepper in some emotional inspiration to get the job done. So this is a more just generally assertive ISTJ. And I think sometimes ISTJs mistype themselves as ESTJs if they have a dominant flavoring. Because it appears to be so assertive. It appears to be so managerial. And so a lot of ISTJs with this style or this flavor mistake themselves for extroverts because they have that sense of wanting to move others along.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is both of the cognitive functions are analytic and focused for this particular subtype, just in case you're following along, type geek following along right now.
Right, exactly. So both the introverted sensing or memory and the extroverted thinking or effectiveness have an analytic flavoring to it. It prefers to have that assertive energy. So what kind of careers are suited for the style of ISTJ? Well, there was a couple things that were mentioned on your list, actually, quite a few managerial positions. They gravitate towards business and technical activities. And they usually rise, right? They are very good at rising in the ranks to administrative, managerial, or even political roles. Yeah. And so that's very common. But they might also dip their toe in other things. They might end up becoming coaches. They are not bad at counseling. Oftentimes they find themselves in counseling positions. Instructional design, nursing, public speaking, teaching, tech support, writing. These are all places that dominant ISTJs can be found. And there is a sense of certainty that they bring to all of these positions. And so the flavoring that they end up in makes it so that it's very easy for other people to rest into their sense of certainty because they have such a driven place that they're coming from.
Yeah. I would say these ISTJs are probably the most comfortable with hierarchy and, playing in a hierarchical system, and certainly driven toward being at the top. If you're assertive and you have more of a dominant style like this, you're going to be okay with being the boss or the manager that's in charge. The other thing too is I think these are probably the most goal-oriented of all the ISTJs. They set a goal, an intention with focus moving toward that goal or that intention. I think this is going to be that style of ISTJ.
Right, exactly.
So let's move over to the creative subtype.
Right.
And this is going to be different attunement of the cognitive functions, but let's talk about the creative.
Okay. So creative subtypes are more sociable and creative than their other ISTJ brethren. And if you're a type geek, basically what this means is that your perceiving function, in this case introverted sensing or what we call memory, that's going to have a more analytic bent. So it's going to be the more focused, assertive energy. But the judging function, in this case, extroverted thinking or effectiveness, this is going to be more holistic. It's going to have more of a peripheral sort of openness to it. So that creates a creative subtype because there's less certainty about how to make things happen and more openness about just perceiving reality, more of an attunement to the creative process that's found in perception as opposed to a certainty of how things have to be done. And so they're going to actually have less of a managerial bent to them. In fact, I would say that creative ISTJs are sometimes quite often mistyped, actually sometimes quite often. No, I would say that these are the ISTJs that have some of the hardest time identifying what their best fit type is because they don't look like the stereotypical ISTJ. So some of the qualities are that they're affable, enthusiastic, expressive, friendly. They tend to be congratulatory and convey an excitement about upcoming prospects. They network and involve other people. So sometimes they even appear to be extroverts. Just like the dominant ISTJ can appear extroverted, so can the creative subtype appear extroverted. They are still focused on analytic decision-making skills, mental planning, attention to details, clear speech. So all of those are still part of the general ISTJ makeup.
Yeah.
But there is a little bit more of an awareness of other people's body language, of voice tone, of noticing visual patterns and making it personal to them. So there's a little bit more attunement to the social aspect other than just getting things done aspect. And whatever comes their way, they are really good at matching it up with where they've seen this before and then making patterns off of that. So there's a sense of kind of figuring things out as they go a little bit more than having to be so pre-planned like other ISTJ subtypes might be.
So then in contrast with maybe the more dominant ISTJ, who's real goal-oriented, setting a goal, setting an intention, going toward it, this ISTJ flavoring is more go with the flow, like letting the world happen, letting things just emerge as they go, being creative, responding to the environment as things happen along the timeline.
Right. Well, and I wouldn't say like as a general characteristic, but definitely in comparison to their ISTJ
Thank you,
counterparts.
No, they're not going to be like an ESFP, like just wing it, whatever. Like they're going to want to have plans and set things in tone, but they're more open to flexibilities and things.
Right. It's more fluid. It's more casual. It's a more engaged style. And again, they can sometimes think of themselves as being extroverts. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody with ISTJ preferences that was a creative subtype might have misidentified as having more of an extroverted style or a perceiving style. So this is a look-alike type to others, other types that are not ISTJs. And in fact, in some ways, there's almost a sense of like, well, I can't be an ISTJ. I'm not that buttoned up.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important to know that there are some ISTJs that just have a little bit more openness. Now, again, it's in comparison to other ISTJs. If something really comes out of left field, something that they weren't expecting at all, that of course is going to throw them off because they're still leading with introverted sensing or memory. And so there is still going to be a desire to know what's coming and be planned and that sort of thing. But in comparison to the others, it is definitely a more open, casual style.
Well, and I'd be interested to talk to Tanya, who we interviewed last year on the show, talking about her ISTJ experience. I'd be curious to see if she identifies more with this creative subtype because, again, she's an interior designer, a photographer. And if you, as an ISTJ, go listen to that episode, I think she shows up very different than most ISTJs, or at least talked about on the internet. So it's great to hear that. And I think I would assume she's probably in that creative framework. Again, I would let her decide for herself. I'm not going to project that onto her.
Right.
But I bet she would report, I kind of feel more creative. Go with it. Go with the energies of the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, not definitely she is a creative. Again, she gets to decide that for herself. But it does seem that people who are attracted to things like photography or ISTJs attracted to photography and interior design, it makes sense. It would track if she did have a creative flavoring. Some of the other career options that really suit people of this style are anything in the arts, history, psychology, travel, writing. They may still have that practical side, though, that encourages them to go less in the arts and a little bit more in business or engineering. But Dario says that they might just marry everything together in something like industrial psychology.
Yeah.
So there's a practical side that goes, well, I should probably do something that will give me the best career options, but also I'm really into this thing over here, so let's try to marry it all together. But there's also a lot of creative ISTJs found in performance and acting, as journalists, as painters. And so a lot of these, again, as we mentioned, run against the stereotypes.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about dominant. We've talked about creative. We got 2 more left. Let's talk about normalizing.
Right.
So what does this type of ISTJ look like?
So normalizing probably is the closest to the stereotype that we could consider. Normalizing.
Even the word makes me think. Like, again, I'm an ENFP preferences, right? So when I think of an ISTJ, the word normalizing immediately, like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, because you don't think of yourself as being normal.
No.
And so the opposite would be the normal. Right. So normalizing subtypes are more conventional and specialized.
Yeah.
And so because of that, there's a dutiful nature that comes along with this subtype. And again, this is probably the closest to the stereotypes that you're going to read about ISTJs. So words like diligent, loyal, meticulous, modest, serious, these are all characteristics of the normalizing ISTJ. They work a lot under the umbrella of a big organization. It's very common for them to be part of an organization. And so this is where you're going to say things like the police officer that you mentioned before, or somebody in the military. There's a lot of attraction to organizations and in institutions. That suits them. They have a strong analytical bent. They are the stereotype of the left-brained person, right? Who's that linear, literal thinker. They have that measured, stoic, thoughtful approach to life. They tend to be the most introverted of the ISTJ types, like both the dominant and the creative can sometimes show up more extroverted. This type is going to show up as a more introverted version of an ISTJ. And they're going to gravitate to the classics, right? Anything in the professional realm or anything they really feel like they can themselves attain that will give them a sense of stability and security. So practical, technical professions like accountant, that was the very first one on your list. That is very much the normalizing ISTJ preference, is something like accounting. Computer programming, doctor, engineer, lab scientist, lawyer, nurse, teacher, technician. So they're far more likely to do all of this not in an entrepreneurial position, but more working for somebody else, because there's a sense of security that comes with that. But there's also a sense of connection that comes with it too, because as a normalizing subtype, they're going to want to be part of a community.
Yeah, and I would say this subtype also sees the value in the system, the larger system, like plugging into the larger system. There is a value to that, right? And maybe it can be overdone, especially from my perspective. So this is from my perspective, but I think this is the ISTJ that understands systemically, like the whole picture in a system way. So we have a friend, for example, who wanted to go to another country to volunteer. There was some trauma happening in this country overseas, and this person is in North America and Canada, and they have an ISTJ father who they were expressing they want to go take direct action and contribute directly. And their father said, actually, the best thing you can do to contribute to that country that's in turmoil is stay at home, get a stable job, pay your taxes, and our country of Canada will then support that through your taxes and through all the structure, the larger system that's at play. Don't take direct action, feed into the system, and the system will help support the actions that need to be taken on a global scale. And I think that's it seems to me that would be a very normalizing ISTJ type framework is we have these systems for a reason. Let's go ahead and lean into them, help support them, and they will take care of us if we take care of them.
Right.
And I think that's a valid way to go through life. I think that we need that kind of thinking. And that I think would play to this type of subtype.
Yeah, for sure. There's not as much ambition in a normalizing ISTJ. They understand the importance of filling roles, and that, like you said, that we all support each other. And so there's a purpose that comes along with working in these kinds of institutions. Yeah. Like you mentioned, it's not just a job. It's also, there's a fulfillment that comes along with it, that I'm a part of this,
the system.
Ecosystem.
Yeah.
That's right. Exactly. Yep. And so that again is the more stereotypical ISTJ version. And so a lot of the jobs you mentioned at the beginning would fall in line with that subtype. Yeah,
like military, supporting government work, stuff like that. The things we think about for ISTJ. Now, the cognitive function, analytic versus holistic, attunement there.
Right. So they're the opposite of the creative type. And so for the type geeks out there, the way you find the normalizing subtype is you take the judging function, in this case, extroverted thinking, or what we call effectiveness. And that's the part that has that analytic orientation. It's more assertive. It kind of determines how something should be set up in its judging function, and then asserts that out into the world. But then the perceiving function, in this case, introverted sensing or memory, that's going to be the more receptive, holistic. It makes them a little bit more open to societal messages, really. That all the normalizing subtypes are like this. They're a little bit more open to how society is set up because their worldview function, that perceptive function, is a little bit more receptive. Yeah. So they're the opposite of the creative.
So are we going to move on to harmonizing?
Yep.
Okay, so the final expression of the ISTJ in career, kind of the energy attunement, is the harmonizing ISTJ. Mm-hmm. And this would be both of those cognitive functions holistic. Mm-hmm. They're more diffused. There's no analytic focus of these functions at all. They're diffused and they're open. So both of them are diffused now. How does this make an ISTJ show up differently?
Right. So this would be the opposite of the dominant, the harmonizing. And this is a more personal and reflective version of the type. So you're not going to have as many stereotypes around ISTJs here either, because this is a lot more of a, it's like very interpersonal, right? They put their heart into training other people to help them. And they really focus on those interpersonal sort of reflective qualities and characteristics. And so they end up having a more, especially if this has been developed over time, if this has come through age, it's a more sophisticated way of thinking and working that marries a little bit more of a reflection. Like, let's not just assume, let's not be single-minded on goals, let's not force anything. Yeah. There's less of that sort of chaotic creative energy. Not that an ISTJ is ever going to be that chaotic, but it's like a little less of that. But it's also a little less like, let's support the institutions. It's more of a personal way of going through life, observing and thinking one's way throughout it. And so it's going to be a chill vibe ISTJ. It's going to be a real chill vibe version. So there is a specialization that comes along with this. It's less specialist than the normalizing, but there are like ways of thinking that become a harmonizing ISTJ's favorite way of experiencing things. And it's actually quite complex. So there's a mastery of certain elements that they really enjoy doing with complexity. And anything that falls in that wheelhouse is very exciting. But anything that falls out of it, sometimes they're not 100% sure how to engage with that thing. So an example of this could be as a counselor, really getting good at counseling other people by listening to them, watching their body language, understanding what all the little nuances mean, matching it to tools that they've used in the past and really being with that person and helping them guide. And then having all this complexity happening in the moment of counseling and coaching. But then once the situation is done and they're thrown in another situation, not having nearly the same sophistication. So there's a lot of mastery over interpersonal skills or anything that really helps individuals out or people out. And so these ISTJs gravitate towards anything that will put them in that position. So career-wise, they're looking at things like advising. They're far more likely to advise management than to be in management.
The consultants, maybe.
Right, exactly. They tend to gravitate towards marketing, right? We did another one where we talked about ESFP types, and it's like all four of them liked marketing. All the subtypes were like, I could do marketing. In this case, this is the ISTJ that will be attracted to marketing because it's more focused on the interpersonal skill of it. And there's a lot of focus on quality. So product quality might be something that really attracts them, or conducting trainings for people so that they have a really good user experience. There might be some acting as a liaison between organizational layers. So when people at this level need to communicate with people at this level, they might really sort of struggle, but this might be a person who can really bridge the gaps of communication.
So like a corporate translator, someone that maybe works with the technical department, like the tech team, the IT department, and maybe the people have to implement the information technology. This person's maybe a go-between bridge to bridge both worlds, this type of subtype.
Right. And because both of their functions are holistic, which means that they're just kind of more of an open person. There's an openness to navigating through situations, not in the way that maybe they've always had to, but like more of an opening to what this situation needs of them. So there'll be less. There's less of a rut. They're not going to be an ISTJ that finds themselves necessarily in a rut as much, or insisting that things be set up in a certain way. There's going to be more of an opening and working with the environment as they go through it. And so they're also good at working with students. So they might be a coach for students or a coach for employees. And there might be a lot of flexibility, right? There's like an openness to change with this style of ISTJ that gives them a certain seasoning, especially if this has been developed over time and not something that was enforced when they were young. If it's enforced when they're young, they might actually kind of struggle a little bit. But if it's something that they've learned over time, that like my way, that whole my way is the highway thing doesn't really work out, then on the other side, you'll see this really beautiful expression of an ISTJ that has that openness, that ability to train, but might have lost some of that managerial directive quality. Like goal orientation might not be as important to them as people orientation. And again, they might mistype. They might believe they're feeling types because they have that interpersonal focus.
Now, we're talking about this in the framework of career. These expressions could be stratified. Like at home, you might be a little bit of a different expressed subtype than you are at the office or at work. So we're talking about this through the lens of career. And remember, these aren't rigid subtypes. This isn't who you are. If your cognition is ISTJ, these are ways you can express. And if you have a tendency to be, lean more toward one of these subtype expressions, you can grow and stretch and lean into some of the others. So maybe it's on a maturity line through your life. Like early on in your life, maybe you started off with more of a normalizing ISTJ framework. You got a job, let's just say as an accountant, and you worked at that for a couple decades. And then all of a sudden you felt a calling to sort of lean more into your creative side. Maybe there's a career change where you became more creative later in life after you did more of the managerial stuff. You ended up opening up different energies. So these are available to us, all of us. It doesn't matter your personality type. These flavors are available to us to lean into and explore more of who we are and what we want to do in life through our career.
To piggyback on what you're saying, I think there's really two major ahas or insights that can be had from engaging with these subtypes and understanding careers through them. The first is, what kind of person do I want to be? Like you said, let's say that I identify as a normalizing ISTJ, but there's an opportunity for management and really stepping into my ability to lead other people. Well, then I might need to move into a more, dominant directorial position as an ISTJ. And then I might want to seek a job or go out for something that will force me to flex those muscles because I have it inside of me. I just haven't really been using it.
Yeah.
Or I might have discovered something more of a sort of a spiritual tone, and I really enjoyed mentoring younger people in my career path. And so now I'm moving towards more of a harmonizing ISTJ style. Or like you said, maybe I just kind of feel like I need a more creative space. And so going out for something in a creative field might open that up for me. So what's nice about this is it's not just what do you want to do, it's kind of who do you want to be, right? And what qualities and characteristics do you want to emerge? Because the second big aha is the career itself will help mold you. And so what we choose as our career path is going to alter and change the kind of person we are in response to the thing that we have to do for 40 plus hours. So I think it's really an interesting relationship that we build with our careers to understand that it's not just matching something, it's also understanding that we're like growing with it. And what we choose, we're going to grow into oftentimes. And if we can't, maybe it's time to flex a different aspect of our personality type.
You want to talk about countering stereotypes. I mean, again, if you're listening to this as an ISTJ, you've probably read something about your personality type online. There's some jokes going around of how rigid and unbending you are as an ISTJ. But the brain scans from Dr. Nardi would argue very differently. Your dominant or driver cognitive function of introverted sensing or memory is the most adaptable cognitive function over time, meaning you are the most flexible on a long enough timeline of all of the personality types. I mean, ISFJs are probably the other one. So don't discount the fact of putting yourself in certain conditions, into a certain career role, can really shape you and can really make you go down a road and help wire you and bring out all of these elements of you. So choosing what career you enter over time will shape who you are as a person. So be mindful of that too, because the choices you make will start to shape how you are.
Yeah. Sorry, my introverted thinking has to do one tiny
Please
little
do.
quibble. You are accurate. I would just make it a little bit more specific that the function itself of introverted sensing or memory. If you're new to type, by the way, this is the mental process that is favored by SJs in the Myers-Briggs system, that the function itself is the most flexible over time, over a long enough timeline.
Yeah. I didn't say that. What
Well,
did I say?
you said the ISTJs are the most flexible over time, and the reason why I want to make this little,
Yes.
I want
Thank
to
you
be
for that.
specific about this is the way to make yourself the most flexible over time is to put yourself in different environmental,
That's right.
in different situations. If you allow yourself to be in multiple different environments, you will be able to adapt to them. If you find yourself in the same environment
Yes.
throughout your whole life, you're not going to be, you're not going to flex to be flexible because you're not flexing to anything, right?
Well,
There's no adaptation happening. And so the function itself requires a variance of environments to really do what it does well.
Well, if it doesn't have that variance of environments, it will be very unique in how it's wired. In other words, the same thing that we say creates the rut or the structural, the unflexibleness. The reason why it's unflexible is because of the adaptation,
Right.
Meaning the trail that introverted sensing gets on starts to groove in a very particular way. In other words, on the brain scans, my personality type, ENFP, you would think would show up in tons of variants. But we actually, on brain scans, our dominant cognitive function shows up with a lot of homogenization. But introverted sensing users show up so unique because they get on these unique paths, and that keeps shaping them more and more distinction, more and more uniqueness. So thank you for clarifying that, because that's what I was intending to communicate. I appreciate your TI, though, to help land that plane.
Yeah, no, I just, I think that it's actually a really important message for people who use this function.
Yeah.
To know that new situations almost always feel really scary. And if an ISTJ is listening to this podcast specifically because they're in a time period of transition, I mean, the idea of, sort of financial insecurity, that idea of having to change jobs and having to learn something all over again. And especially if it's in a totally different field, or if you're feeling called and pulled towards something that is outside of your current experience, I can only imagine the challenge with giving yourself permission to have that desire or want, and balancing that with the practicality and the need to make sure that you're safe and secure. And if you have dependents and a family relying on you, there can be a lot of challenge in that situation. And I think it was really important for you to mention, no, you have it inside you. You are pre-wired to be able to learn new things and be highly flexible and adaptable over time. So the choices that you make, you can give yourself permission to want something that's out of your current wheelhouse. You can give yourself permission to go towards something that will help you grow into another version of yourself, or maybe even a better version of yourself with more, with more tools at your disposal, knowing that maybe another job, maybe another career is the thing you want to be moving into in order to gain some of those tools, some of those characteristics.
Yeah.
Like take, for example, I want to be more of a leader, so I'm going to move into a more dominant ISTJ style role, or I want to have more compassion and work with people one-to-one, so I'm going to move into a more harmonizing ISTJ role. I think it's important to give that little extra, encouragement that not only is it okay, but it might be exactly what you need to be doing.
So you've been listening along. You're most likely an ISTJ, or at least you have an ISTJ in your life. You want to learn more about them. But let's just talk to you as an ISTJ right now. What's coming up for you? Have you sort of mapped yourself to one of these subtypes, the expression of your personality? Do you see yourself in the descriptions here? Have you picked a career that's in alignment with how you identify as a subtype? Or do you find yourself in a career that's not really the best career for how you feel that your subtype is wired? So are you out of alignment with that career? What's your story? Come over to personalityhacker.com. Directly below this episode, you can ask a question, share your comment, Or like I just said, share your story. We love to hear stories. You've been sitting here listening to us talk for a while. You haven't had a microphone, but we want to hear from you. As we talk about this, what is your career story and what is your career intention going forward? Are you in a transition? Are you cool with where you are? Where have you come from? Come over, make your voice heard.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave us a rating and review on iTunes, it helps us out a lot. It helps me out a lot because I know people are listening. We have a video version of this podcast that you can watch on YouTube. You might be watching it right now on YouTube. And if you enjoyed it, please leave a comment, smash the like button, as the kids say, and you can subscribe and hit the little bell so that you are notified when new episodes come out. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And are you uncertain about your type, the type preferences that you have currently been identifying with? Sometimes when people hear of all the variants in the different types, they go, oh, well, maybe I was mistyped. I don't know. You can head over to personalityhacker.com and take our free assessment. It'll give you an orientation point so that you can really begin your journey of discovering your best fit type.
That's right. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.